So here we are, and I think that's our official beginning. And the three of us are live. We have several participants who are muted right now. So why don't we get right to it, say a few words, and then open up for discussion. Matt, how do you compare the food in Germany to the food in Spain, or no comment?
They're both wonderful.
Otherwise, how do you think the last week went in the class?
Well, it seemed like a lot of people, a lot of activity in the forums, good questions popping up. Seems like a lot of activity and good stuff.
Any one thing you want to pick up and discuss proactively?
I guess I could make some comments on, there were a number of people who were asking about Nash Equilibrium and mixed strategies. That's been an item that's been pretty prominent in the forums. And understanding why it is that we see randomization and why one player has to randomize in a way that makes the other player indifferent. So that's one question that is a little bit hard to get one's mind wrapped around, and I think it takes some time to get used to this idea.
Go for it.
Yeah. So when we think about equilibrium in Nash with mixed strategies, we're thinking about a situation where what's important, often these are in games where there's a need to, in order for the other player to be willing to play different strategies, they have to think that they're going to get the same expected payoff from either strategy, right? So in order to have one player be willing to mix, it has to be that the other player is doing something to make that player indifferent between those two. So that happens in games like soccer that we saw, where you want to act in a way that's unpredictable, so the other player is not going to know which way to go. If they're always going in one direction, then you're not really being unpredictable enough. So I think that the basic elements of this pop up in a lot of real-life settings. Actually, when you look at conflicts, there's a very famous game that goes back to the 1920s, the Colonel Blotto game, which is a game which looks at war and different countries choosing where to put armies. And it's a situation where you have a series of battlefields, and you have to decide where you're going to put your armies, and the other side is going to put their armies up against yours, and whoever has the most people on a given battlefield ends up winning a given battlefield. Whoever wins the most battlefields wins a war. That's a very simple game, but obviously one where you don't want to be predictable. If the other side knows where exactly you're putting your armies, they're going to end up defeating you. So you have to randomize in order to make sure that they can't take advantage of you, and that means that you have to randomize in a way that makes them indifferent.
Kevin, any topic you want to pick up?
Yeah, sure. So there's been some discussion in the forums about max-min strategies, so maybe I'll say a little bit about that. So some people have been asking about whether max-min strategies always exist, and asking things like how they're different from making your opponent indifferent, those sorts of questions, whether they're present in every game. So you can think of a max-min strategy as being the strategy that makes things best for you in a world where you aren't willing to make any assumptions at all about your opponent. So a Nash Equilibrium is a strategy that is best for you in a situation where you believe that you want to make the assumption that your opponent is rational and has the same beliefs that you do. But a max-min strategy is for situations where you believe nothing about your opponent. They could do any arbitrarily bad thing, and you want to do as well for yourself as possible in the worst case. So you can probably see from the way that I've defined that it always has to exist, because I'm saying you're doing as well as possible for yourself in the worst case. So it's kind of a maximum. It's the best you can do, assuming nothing. So there always has to be some best you could do, assuming nothing. And so indeed, the max-min strategy always does exist. And it exists in any game. The max-min theorem from von Neumann says that there is always, in a zero-sum game, the max-min strategy and indeed the min-max strategy always coincide with the Nash equilibrium. In general games, which is to say games that are not zero-sum, this isn't true. So in those games, the max-min strategy could be something different. But still could in principle make sense to play if you didn't think that your opponent was rational and if you were very conservative, if you wanted to be motivated mostly by your worst case. And
Thanks, Kevin.
More to add to that?
Maybe just in the interest of time, because we have quite a number of people on the call, we'll move on. People,
Okay.
should feel free to ask a follow-up question if that's what they'd like to bring up. For my part, let me address one set of questions that we saw. These were questions that were typed online at the end of the last Hangout, and we've also seen some discussion in the forums. And it's also a question we often get. We got it also in the first class we taught, and that is applications. We're speaking about basic models, mathematics, and people naturally ask, so what are the applications for the theory of games? Now, we cautioned at the beginning that this is a foundational course about the foundation of game theory, and we'll only speak about application to the extent that they help understand the underlying models and theory. But of course, we completely understand the question. We answered it a little bit last time. I'll do it a little bit more now, but again, I just want to set the expectations. Let me speak from my personal experience. Let me mention 3 applications that I have been exposed to. The first had to do with transmission of energy in California. So when there's one problem is how to get the electrons you need to heat your home and light up your home. But even if the electrons are available, they somehow need to get to your home, and that's another constrained resource. And there's a market in California, as there is elsewhere, for the right to use transmission lines to transmit electricity. Turns out to be a rather different market than eBay or NASDAQ or anything else because of specific requirements. And economists have worked hard to design these markets, and I had the opportunity to participate in that and also help design the software to implement it. And the important thing to realize there is that one needs to understand the basics of game theory, in particular topics that we haven't discussed yet, but we will, namely games of incomplete information or Bayesian games and their application to auction theory. If you understand the basics, then you can go ahead and design the right system, and it's not simply a matter of taking, I'm going to take the type of auction I see on, say, eBay and run it here. That was one example. A very different example is doing promotions on the internet. You can imagine that, say, Coke wants to promote a new drink they have, and they want to perhaps get people to, active on the internet, and they have to design the right incentive, a kind of a game, for example, a survivor-like game where people get codes and need to redeem the codes, but hold on to their ammunition for long enough, and the last person standing gets to win a prize. And so, again, we had the opportunity to help design such a game, and the distinction between games and markets there becomes blurred. They are entertaining, but the same principles of market design operate there too. Finally, a very different application that I've only been peripherally involved with, and these are security games. These are games of, not unlike the Colonel Blotto games that Matt described, but imagine inspections in a large airport where there are, say, 2 players, the security firm securing the facility, and terrorists who wish to infiltrate it, and they both have strategies, and the question is how to play this game well. I'll give you some examples, and again, I'll repeat what we said last time, where it's never the case that you say, oh, I'll model it as a game of type 3, and I'll compute the Nash Equilibrium, and that give me my answer. The situation is often much more nuanced, but the very models and thinking modes of game theory turn out to be instructive. So now I suggest Matt and Kevin, is it okay with you if we go to the students and engage them?
Sure.
All right, so we'll go one by one. We'll go from, let's say, right to left. And when we call on you, please unmute your mic, introduce yourself, tell us your name and where you're from, and anything you want to discuss. Zara, starting with you.
So I guess my question was pretty general, but
Excuse me for interrupting, but tell us a little about where you're from.
Okay. I grew up in Pennsylvania, and now I'm married to a man who lives in Mumbai. So now I'm in Mumbai, and right now I'm visiting family in California, and I'll be heading back to Mumbai pretty soon.
Thank you. What is your question?
So my question was that, and I guess what you just mentioned about the security and the terrorists, how in game theory, like how do you know what the information that you have? How can you ever? So I'm reading this book called Fooled by Randomness, and the whole idea is that what we should be aware of is we should be more aware of what we don't know than what we know. So how can we make accurate conclusions based on information? How can we make the game theory conclusions based on information if we can really never know all the different pieces of information?
Kevin, you want to take a stab?
Sure. So I think there are kind of two answers. The stage that we're at in the course right now is really about how to reason strategically about situations where we really understand exactly what's going on. So right now we're talking about games where we really understand everybody's strategic interests entirely, or at least we understand them entirely on average. It turns out that if there was kind of randomness in the environment and we knew what that randomness was, but it all kind of averages out, that would amount to the same thing. But essentially right now we're looking at what's called the perfect information case, right, where that's all fully known. And the reason we start with that case is there's still a lot to say about that case. And if we don't get all of that out of the way first, we're going to get confused about what the kinds of trickiness that come just from the fact that we're in a multi-person strategic interaction and the other kinds of trickiness that come from unknown information like what you described. So first of all, we're getting these basics out of the way to make sure we understand that. Once we've done that, we're going to come again to the model of games that Yoav described called Bayesian games, which are indeed about there being additional sources of uncertainty in the environment, and particularly about different people having access to different parts of that random information. So if there's something about the environment that everybody is equally uninformed about, what we're looking at now is a reasonable model of some such situations. But once that random information is such that not everybody knows it, that I'm maybe better informed about some random variable in the environment than you are, and you then acting in this game have to reason about what I would do about that better knowledge that I have, then we're going to need Bayesian games to think about that. So in a sense, you're anticipating something we're going to get to later in the course.
I'll move on, even though I know that there's more to be said here, and let's now. It's the third time I'm pronouncing your name. Let's see how close I get. Panagiotis.
That was your best shot.
So, tell us a little about yourself and then what your question is.
Yes, I am from Greece. I live in Athens. I'm studying mathematics at the University of Athens, Kapodistrian University. And I study game theory in my university, and I think it was very interesting to watch this program from Coursera. Okay, that's all for the introduction.
Okay, and what question or topic do you want to raise?
Okay, so we know that in a the fundamental principle in game theory is that two players who are playing a game, they share the same level of intelligence and rationality. This is a fundamental principle. But if we have a game and two players who share the same level of intelligence playing a specific game, and then we have the same game with two other players who are sharing a higher level of intelligence, then we are going to have the same outcome in the game.
So, for example, if you play the game in the University of Athens and if you play it in the University of Patras, you may get different results, huh?
Yes, if we say that in University of Athens we are cleverer than the University of Patras.
So let me take a stab at that. I'm Matt. There's a question I can answer finally. So let me take this and leave the hard question for you. Okay.
Okay, but let me say to not have any confusion that I don't say that some of the pair of players are not so clever to play a game. They are enough clever to play this game, but not at the same level of two others.
No, of course. You raise a very, very important question. Of course, game theory is not only about two players, it's any number of players, often though we give examples from two. But you're right that we make very strong assumptions in the standard analysis, not only that they are equally intelligent, but they are perfectly intelligent, right? We assume that they can make perfect interests, they can model each other perfectly, they model each other modeling themselves perfectly, because fundamentally the Nash Equilibrium makes that assumption. And you're right to point out that as clever as we are at the University of Athens, some of us are not complete geniuses. So how do we do this? And indeed, this is a major one reason why you can't simply take game theory and apply it as is. There's a literature on so-called bounded rationality that tries to model players who are less than perfectly rational. There are various ways of modeling. One is a computer scientific way, actually, where you model players as what's called finite automata. These are, and for people not in computer science, don't worry, but it's a way of modeling a more limited capacity to compute than a general computer could, and see what happens when you do that. Another way is to have a levels of intelligence where you say that the base level is where people randomize among the strategies with no thinking at all. The second level is where people best respond to such very basic players. The third level is where people best respond to the second level, and so on. That is another model of bounded rationality. If you look at computers who have played games online, whether it's chess or checkers or robotic soccer, the one place where people actually computed a Nash equilibrium was in poker, but what they did is very interesting. They didn't take the game of poker, which, by the way, is a Bayesian game, the same kind of game that Kevin and I mentioned before. They didn't go and compute the equilibrium of that game and play the equilibrium. What they did, they first approximated the game, because the game is too complicated to model exactly. And secondly, they didn't compute the exact equilibrium, but the approximate equilibrium. The approximate Nash equilibrium, or really what's called the Bayes Nash equilibrium, as we'll see when we get to games of incomplete or Bayesian games. And so that's another way of backing off from the perfect rationality and cleverness assumption that we've been making so far. It's a very interesting, complicated topic. I'm glad you raised it, but that's all I want to say about it right now. Okay?
Okay. If I have anything to add, if we have a second round,
okay,
I'll go for it.
Hold on to ammunition. But for now,
Okay.
please mute your mic, and we'll move on to Nafe.
Okay.
We can't see you, but I know you can see and hear us. So please unmute your mic and introduce yourself.
Hello, everybody. My name is Nafei, and I'm from University of Southern California. Actually, I just graduated, so I'm from China, and I'm very interested in the game theory, so I want to learn more about it. So this is the reason why I join your discussion. And as to the question, honestly, so far I don't have any questions. Yeah, but anyways, it's nice to meet you guys.
Okay,
Thank you.
so thank you for joining us. And Panagiotis, I think your mic is not muted, so please make sure that it is.
Could you hear me?
Yeah, we could hear you. We could hear you well. Thank you. I understand you didn't have a question, but thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And please mute your mic now. Okay, and Panagiotis, we cannot hear you, so I guess your mic is muted, but we still see you. Let's, however, move to Kelly. Kelly, can you hear us? Unmute your mic.
Yes, hi, I can hear you all. How's everyone today?
Good. Why are you not jumping to the top of the screen? Okay, I hear. This should do the trick. There you go. So please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Kelly. I'm a native of Detroit, Michigan, and recently back in the Detroit metro area. I'm an engineer by trade and have been in technical sales for about 15 years. I got into the game theory course largely because I have an interest about how it extrapolates to business, in particular startups. And I was very intrigued about some of the discussion at one of the recent TED conferences around the game theory implications for startups like Dropbox, et cetera. So I wanted to find out more about the theory and how it related to some of the macroeconomics courses I took in undergrad. My question, I think, was pretty well addressed by Kevin earlier. It had to do with Nash Equilibria, but I'm wondering, Kevin, if, or anyone, can extrapolate a little bit. The thing that really sort of threw me off about the Nash Equilibria as it related to pure Nash Equilibrium was when you have more than two players. So in the examples we've had so far, a lot of the examples have been with two players to, I believe, simplify some of the discussion and the principles initially for laypersons like myself. But as you start to get to 3, 4, 5, etc., and you move it out, I'm wondering how that affects sort of the discussions that we've had up until now, if at all. The reason why I ask is because I'm thinking about a comparison to like a probability and how that may ebb and flow depending on the number of participants in the sample for the probability. Is that the same case with the pure Nash equilibrium, for example?
So Kevin, this sounds like a complicated question that we better leave to Matt, don't you think?
Yeah, let's let Matt have it. I don't think I'm up for it.
Matt, we can't hear you. Maybe you may be muted.
Yeah, no, thanks. So can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So let me start off by saying that the basic definitions still hold, and what's the difference between a game with 2 players, 3 players, 4 players, and more? In terms of pure strategy Nash equilibrium, the concept is still one where the idea is if everybody was going to do exactly what we forecast, nobody would want to change. So it's a stable point that if you got there, you would stay there. Now, in terms of a business environment, part of what's missing from a Nash equilibrium is how on earth we figure out which one, if there's several of them, we're going to play. And when you get an environment with lots and lots of players, it can be much more difficult for a group to suddenly reach some Nash equilibrium and figure out that that's a stable point and stay there. So there's a lot of things that have been studied in game theory about dynamics and trying to understand how is it that many players in a complicated environment are pushed to end up playing something that looks like an equilibrium. When does it happen? When does it not happen? And there's no easy answer to that, and especially in situations where there might be multiple Nash equilibria, many players. If we start mixing in the things we just talked about, that some of them are very hyper-rational and other ones are less rational, what kinds of predictions do we make? So when you start increasing the complexity of the situation, it's going to get more and more difficult for the society to coordinate on something. But nonetheless, the prediction of a pure Nash equilibrium is still a well-defined concept and gives us some benchmark to work with.
Thanks, Matt. Let's move on to Juan. I think we fixed the mic problem, right, Juan?
Yes, I think it's fixed. Okay. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on the place of the world. Well, I'm from Spain, and I have been working a lot of years for a telecom operator. I'm interested in the game theory because of the use of mathematics in the life, in economics, and in real life. Okay.
Juan,
social life.
Juan, where in Spain are you from?
Madrid.
Okay.
Okay. Then my question is about if you can explain a little bit more about the statistical interpretation of the miss strategies. I mean, one player playing several times, or many players playing just one time. That is equivalent, or that's my question.
A wonderful question. I don't know, Kevin, Matt did a really good job last time. Shall we just stick with the winner?
Yeah, I think Matt's our Nash Equilibrium guy today. I think we should.
Matt, you're on.
Okay. Yeah, so indeed, you're exactly right that there's different ways to interpret Nash equilibrium and mixed strategies. And I think, as you're correctly pointing out, what's important to a given player is that they can't predict exactly what the other player is going to do, and they end up indifferent between several strategies based on the fact that the other person might be, for instance, randomizing. Now, whether that randomization comes from one person actually flipping a coin or explicitly choosing in a random manner, or whether it comes from playing against some population of players who have tendencies and not knowing exactly what the particular person you're going to play against is going to do. That it doesn't really matter for the concept, and it applies both situations. So both of the examples that you talk about are valid interpretations statistically. And as long as I'm playing against a population where some of them might always go left, some always go right, but if the game requires that they go 60-40, then as long as the population I'm facing plays 60-40, I'm still going to be indifferent. And it doesn't matter whether it's one player or a random draw from a population that plays that way.
All right. Let's move on. Juan, please mute your mic. And Blaine, you can unmute yours.
Okay, good morning. So I'm from Boulder, Colorado, and I've been in Colorado over 30 years. Currently, I work in things like management, strategy, business analysis, and things of this nature. And I'm interested in game theory as it might apply to business strategic analysis in competitive situations, as well as internal analysis of risk and choices in things like budget planning and things like that. My question is also about Nash equilibrium, but it's more about the solution process than the interpretation, so maybe it's not Matt, so I don't know. Basically, we've started looking at mixed strategy solutions, and we've done the simple cases where you assign an unknown probability, you assume a support. In most of the cases we've done, all the possible choices are in the support, so you get a really simple set of linear equations. I'm curious about if you have a slightly larger game like 3x3, and you don't know the support, so the support for each player might be all or it might be some of the choices. Is it necessary to basically try all combinations if you can't a priori reason the support the way we've been doing? Or are we going to come later and learn more smart techniques to do it? That's sort of the gist of my question.
So, Blaine, I'll give you the short answer. I'll give you the short answer. Actually, mute your mic if you don't mind. So I'll give you the short answer, and that is that if you can really answer your question, so the highest award in computer science, the Turing Award, sort of the Nobel Prize in computer science, and if you can really answer your question, you get one of those. But the longer answer will be given to you by Kevin.
Oh, I thought I was off the hook there. This is really keeping me on my toes. Okay, sure. So in the case, first of all, it matters whether you're thinking about a two-player game or a game with more than two players. Things are a bit more straightforward in the case of a two-player game. In the case of a two-player game, you're right. Well, actually, in any game, you're right that it's possible to guess a support and test whether it's an equilibrium. In the case of a two-player game, this turns out to be what's called a linear feasibility problem, which means that it's relatively straightforward, which is to say in polynomial time, you can test whether a given support is part of an equilibrium. When you're in a game with more than two players, already that is a bit harder to do, but still pretty straightforward to test whether a given support is an equilibrium. That's because the constraints become nonlinear. Because I have to think about the probabilities of different players multiplied together. However, the bigger problem that you already correctly note is that the number of supports grows really enormously with the number of players. It grows exponentially. So it doesn't seem like a great algorithm to be just grinding through all of the different supports and testing them as the game gets big, either in the number of actions or in the number of players. Surprisingly, it's actually not as bad as it might seem in practice to do exactly this. The reason is that it's empirically very often the case that games have equilibria in very small supports. And so if I start by testing the small supports, there aren't all that many very small supports. And empirically, it tends to work out that I find an equilibrium quickly. Now, in the worst case, there can be only an equilibrium in a big support, and then that wouldn't work. Indeed, there are other algorithms, both for the two-player case and for the case of more than two players, that consider how to find equilibria without simply enumerated supports. These are complicated optimization algorithms that involve solving linear complementarity problems in the case of two-player games and more general forms of optimization problems in n-player games. We're certainly not going to cover that in this course, but this course gives you a good jumping-off point for being able to study this.
I'll only add that Kevin spoke about the algorithmic aspects. There's the complexity aspects, asking, can we prove in principle how hard it is to answer these sort of questions? And there's a line of research that fascinating here that shows that these problems are very hard with respect to some class, but unknown with respect to standard classes of complexity. Again, for the computer scientists among you, there's a class called PPAD, for which the problem of the Nash Equilibrium is provably hard. Comparing PPAD to classes such as NP is one of the big open questions. But now that the questions have gotten hard, Matt, is there anything you wanted to say?
Yeah. So actually, well, let me add one thing to this discussion, and then I've got to duck out because the questions are getting difficult now. So first of all, you know, a lot of the games that we're actually interested in modeling in the real world have a lot of structure to them. So they're not as if we just have a giant matrix with different numbers and different entries. There's a logic to a lot of games. And the logic to a lot of games helps us solve them and helps us give us clues to figuring these things out. And so we'll see that as we progress. But nonetheless, there's still, even the games that have a lot of structure can be hard to solve. But I'm going to leave the tough questions to these guys. Great set of questions this week. Thanks all, and look forward to seeing you next week.
See you, Matt. Take care.
Bye, Matt.
And we get the final question from Amit. Amit, please unmute your mic and ask your question and tell us where you're from.
Hi, nice to meet you, all of you. The thing is that I'm doing my work in a communication network using game theory concept to solve such problem. Like in a cognitive radio network, we have some spectrum sensing problem. I have some books related to my work, like uh, I'm using this cognitive radio network, some evolutionary cooperative spectrum sensing games. So those things on this area I'm actually working on. So please give me a solution for that, means for primary user and for licensed user. In a cognitive radio network, we have two types of users: primary users and some primary user means licensed user, and second one is unlicensed user. So using game theory, how can I make a game? How can I make a pricing model for better pricing model? Whatever we have an existing model so far, because because in a spectrum, whatever we have a channel, is there some holes uh, still still is there some holes? So we have to optimize the channel, and to when channel is free without interfering to licensed user, just you put your data as a data packet and send it to your transmitted body. So such type of mechanism I'm trying to implement using this game theory concept. So can you please focus on? And also I have read some books, whatever you written in a multi-agent system. There you also describe something about some implementation. So it's
Thank
better
you, Amit.
for me.
Thank you, Amit. Kevin, can you take this? I'm embarrassingly about to run out of power and I need to fix that. I'll be back in a moment.
All right. Well, it's just down to me. Both of the Stanford guys have run away from all of your hard questions. Amit, what you describe is really an example of a mechanism design problem. Mechanism design is something that we're not going to cover in this class, but we're going to get basically right up to the verge of. So by the end of this class, you'll be in a position to be ready to kind of formally think about mechanism design. Mechanism design basically is kind of the problem of inverse game theory. So it says, how can I shape the rules of an interaction so that when I then model that interaction as a game, it has properties that are as good as possible from my point of view. And the specific details you give about licensed and unlicensed users really are an example of this, where you're saying, you as the designer of a system have your own interests or your own sense of what the system working well would look like. And you would like to shape the way people get access to the system, or maybe what they have to pay for it, in a way that would lead to the system working well, under the assumption that all of the users of that system can't be compelled to behave in ways that you would like, but instead might follow their own interests. So, getting in a very detailed way to an answer to your own question would require being much more specific about exactly what's possible in the system, exactly how people interact with each other, what the constraints are in the system, and what people's utilities are in that system. So I prefer not to go into a more detailed answer, but at the high level, I notice that this is one of the most important applications of game theory in practice. So people are really very interested in thinking about how to use an underlying game theoretic model to then design a protocol or design a system. Indeed, some of the auction problems that Yoav spoke about already in applications are such examples of mechanism design. That's how people think about auctions. As you may be aware, there was a recent Nobel Prize for mechanism design, which indeed kind of has game theory as a foundation. So the question that you raise is certainly one that game theorists would think about similar problems a lot. So thank you for your question.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.
Amit, please mute your mic. I'm glad to report I have power again. And before we end, I notice we have a new guest, Peter. Welcome. Let's first make sure we can hear you.
Yes.
Please
You should be able
introduce
to hear me
yourself.
fine. Well, my name is Peter Sminsky. I'm on the Faroe Islands, and I am sorry for being late. The entire Faroe Islands lost its internet connection to Denmark, so we were isolated for around an hour today.
Well, I don't
was
think.
universities.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. I don't think you could have joined earlier because we were at the maximum of 10, but now that Matt has left, you were able to join.
Okay.
So please, what your question?
Well, this question is actually pretty specific because I was tasked to come up with a few solutions up here on the Faroe Islands regarding to a brain drain. I think I might find an answer within game theory, which is why I'm in this course. I wanted to know, is there a way to model the spread of information and knowledge using game theory? Understood as if in game theory, classically you have a game, we have participants that are reacting to the background environment. Now this could be bits of information or knowledge, or it could be benefits, financial benefits. But I would like to know if it was possible to model the spread of information by turning it around, by using the choices of the players to predict which bits of information will spread to which groups in the society.
It's interesting. It seems to me, if I understood correctly, that you raised a number of different issues. And actually, if you don't mind, mute your mic because I think I'm getting echo because of it. Great, thank you. So I think I heard at least two different questions. One is thinking about incentives to population to get population to behave a certain way, and would game theory be a useful tool in modeling it? And I think the answer there depends. Certainly you can model it whenever you have a set of agents with their own information and incentives and possible actions you can. Game theory becomes an interesting model when there is some interaction among the reasoning of the agents. In other words, if each agent looks at the income tax in the country and the employment opportunities and perhaps the climate, and then optimizes, it's really a single agent optimization. But if there's a more of a societal process going on where the choices of my peers of how to behave impacts me, then the game theory becomes more relevant. So it's a general answer, but I think you need to ask yourself those questions about your situation if they apply. You then ask about the spread of information, which is a fascinating question that has been studied recently, as perhaps you know, in social networks. And it definitely has game theoretic aspect as well. Kevin, I don't know if this is a good point for you, if you want to chime in on that or some other aspect of the question.
Oh, well, I guess I was thinking to add that it's really a shame that Peter, you came in because of Matt leaving, because indeed Matt has written a book that is fundamentally about the problems that you raised. So Matt has a book called Social and Economic Networks that really does a good job of summarizing a lot of the literature on the kind of social network point that Yoav raises. So as with Amit's question, I think giving a kind of detailed analysis of it would take more than the sort of minute or two that any of us would have to answer your question. But you're quite right that it makes sense to model something like the flow of information through a network. Typically, the structure of that network is very important. So you would want to think about how information flows, who passes information to who, how many hops is that information going to take in getting from one person through the network to another? What do those dynamics look like? The answer is going to be very sensitive to questions like that. But there's a rich literature for thinking about those questions that indeed overlaps with the game theory literature.
Okay.
Well,
so,
just as a side note, perhaps you might be interested in knowing, one of the main problems up here is actually how isolated the Faroe Islands is. And we are losing a hell of a lot of information, a lot of knowledge, as students leave to Denmark. And we're hoping that we could, I'm not asking for a solution here, but I'm saying perhaps in the future you might want to look into it yourself, that we'd like to give an incentive or a non-financial incentive to people to spread information up here, but we're a bit clueless as to how to do that in this situation.
well, I hear that Copenhagen is really a nice place, so there's one incentive right there.
Unfortunately, that's a few hundred kilometers away. We are in the middle of the North Atlantic.
I'm sorry, where are you from? I misheard you.
The Faroe Islands.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that is more isolated. Anyway, on this happy note, I think we should start thinking about bringing it to closure. Kevin, any really funny or clever things you can think of saying before we wind this down?
Well, you make it harder for me when you say that, but I do think it's ironic that Peter is asking in a multi-country Google Hangout as part of a free online course the question of how information can better be shared with the Faroe Islands. I think this whole setting might be something of an answer to your question.
Well, clever and funny. Let's end on that note. Thank you, everybody. It was really a good set of questions. I enjoyed it, and we'll see you all again next week and online.
Bye. Thanks, everybody, for great questions this week.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.